The first thing that hit me was the smell. Expensive sandalwood and stale scotch. Not my cheap apartment. My head throbbed like a bass drum. I shifted, my leg brushing against warm, bare skin. I froze. Slowly, agonizingly, I turned my head. There, snoring softly into a silk pillow, was Harrison, my boss, the man who had meticulously torn apart my quarterly report 12 hours earlier. Then his eyes fluttered open, locking onto mine, and he whispered the words that ruined my life. "Do you remember anything, Arthur? There is a specific type of silence that exists only in the apartments of the ridiculously wealthy. It's thick, insulated. It swallows the ambient noise of the city whole, leaving you alone with the deafening sound of your own heartbeat." That was the silence I woke up to. I didn't open my eyes immediately. I lay there, cataloging the damage. Mouth dry as sandpaper. Head a construction zone. Stomach actively plotting against me. I tried to pull the blanket up to my chin, but the fabric was too heavy, too smooth. It felt like liquid glass. It wasn't my frayed, pill-covered IKEA duvet. I cracked one eye open. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A skyline view that probably cost more than my entire life's earnings. A sprawling monochromatic bedroom that looked like a rendering from an architectural magazine. And then the warmth beside me. The human body is an idiot. Before my brain could catch up, my muscles reacted to the warmth, leaning into it, seeking comfort. My calf brushed against another leg. Hairy, solid. My blood turned to ice water. I snapped both eyes open and turned my head by degrees. He was lying on his stomach, his face turned toward me, half buried in the pillow. His hair, usually slicked back into an intimidating, flawless armor, was a messy, dark halo. The sharp lines of his jaw were relaxed. He looked younger. He looked entirely too human. Harrison, the vice president of acquisitions. Harrison, who made junior analysts cry in the break room. Harrison, who communicated primarily through raised eyebrows and emails consisting of single, devastating words like unacceptable or redo. I was naked in his bed. Panic, pure and unadulterated, seized my throat. I needed to leave. I needed to evaporate. I began to inch backward, sliding across the mattress with the agonizing slowness of a bomb disposal expert. I made it to the edge. My foot touched the plush rug. "Don't!" The voice was gravelly, thick with sleep, and completely devoid of its usual boardroom edge. I froze, one foot on the floor, half the duvet clutched to my chest. Harrison rolled onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow. The sheet pooled around his waist. I deliberately stared at his collarbone, refusing to look any lower. His eyes, a pale, piercing gray that usually made me feel like I was under a microscope, were heavy and bloodshot. We stared at each other. The silence stretched, turning brittle. "Arthur," he finally said. Just my name. It sounded strange in his mouth, without a demand attached to it. "I have to go," I choked out. My voice sounded like rusty hinges. He didn't move to stop me, but he didn't look away either. He sat up a little more, the muscles in his arms flexing slightly. He rubbed a hand over his face, sighing. It was the most exhausted sound I had ever heard. "Do you remember anything, Arthur?" he asked. The question wasn't an accusation. It was quiet, almost hesitant. My mind scrambled. I remembered the company milestone party, the open bar, the terrible cover band. I remembered hiding in a corner with a ridiculous, oversized gin and tonic, watching everyone else network. I remembered Harrison walking over. I remembered the sharp scent of his cologne cutting through the smell of cheap appetizers. After that, flashes. Neon lights blurring past a car window. The heavy clunk of an expensive front door closing. The sudden, overwhelming feeling of being pressed against a wall. No, I lied. It was an instinctual defense mechanism, a reflex. Nothing, I must have blacked out. I'm sorry, Harrison. This was a mistake. A massive, stupid mistake. It won't happen again. Something flickered in his eyes. The softness vanished, replaced instantly by the cold, polished glass I was used to. The shutter came down so fast it almost made a sound. Right, he said, his voice dropping 10 degrees. He fell back onto the pillows, turning his gaze to the ceiling. A mistake. Grab your clothes. They're in the hall. Show yourself out. I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled off the bed, abandoned the duvet, and bolted for the door. I found my pants draped over a modern art sculpture that looked like twisted metal. My shirt was in a crumpled heap near the front door. I dressed in frantic, jerky movements, hopping on one foot to get my shoes on. I didn't look back. I hit the elevator button repeatedly, praying for the doors to close before he walked out of the bedroom. The subway ride back to Brooklyn was a masterclass in self-loathing. I sat in a plastic seat, staring at the grime on the floor, clutching my head. What had I done? I was a cynic. I didn't believe in messy office romances, and I certainly didn't believe in sleeping with the boss. I kept my head down, did my job, and collected my paycheck so I could afford my miserable existence. Now I was a walking HR violation. I spent Sunday oscillating between throwing up and aggressively cleaning my apartment. I scrubbed the grout in my bathroom until my knuckles bled, trying to scour the memory of his skin from my hands. It didn't work. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the phantom weight of him against me. I felt the memory of a hand gripping my hip, pulling me closer. No, I told myself, you don't remember anything. It didn't happen. By Sunday night, I had a plan. Deny, deflect, avoid. We were two adults who drank too much. It meant nothing. It was a statistical anomaly in an otherwise perfectly boring life. I just had to survive Monday. Monday morning hit like a freight train. The corporate office of Vanguard Acquisitions is an assault on the senses. It's all aggressively bright fluorescent lights, glass walls, and the low, constant hum of the HVAC system, masking the sound of crushing ambition. Usually, it just annoyed me. Today, it felt like an interrogation room. I arrived at 7:30 a.m., hoping to bury myself in spreadsheets before the rest of the floor arrived. I grabbed a coffee from the break room. It tasted like battery acid and regret, and retreated to my cubicle. It was a miserable little box, but today it was a fortress. By 8:45 a.m., the floor was buzzing. Greg, a senior analyst who thought highly of his own jokes, leaned over my partition. "Rough weekend, Artie?" he asked, popping a breath mint. "You look like you slept in a dumpster." "Allergies," I muttered, not looking up from my monitor. The numbers on the screen were blurring together. "Right, well, buckle up. The king is in a mood today. He already chewed out the marketing team on his way to the elevator." My stomach performed a slow, sickening roll. The king, Harrison. At exactly 9 a.m., the temperature on the floor seemed to drop. The ambient chatter died down. I didn't need to look up to know he had arrived. I could hear the sharp, rhythmic click of his Oxford shoes on the hardwood floor of the main aisle. I hunched my shoulders, willing myself to become invisible. The footsteps grew louder. They reached my row. They paused. I stopped breathing. I stared at cell B42 on my spreadsheet with an intensity that could have burned a hole through the monitor. 10 seconds passed. Then the footsteps resumed, fading away toward the corner office. I exhaled a shaky breath, slumping back in my chair. The morning dragged on in a state of suspended animation. I attended 2 meetings. Harrison ran both of them. He was in his element, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his voice a steady, authoritative hum. He dismantled arguments with surgical precision. He didn't look at me once, not a single glance. It was exactly what I wanted. So why did my chest feel so tight? By 2 p.m., I had convinced myself that my plan was working. The crisis was averted. He was a professional. He was embarrassed too. We were going to pretend it never happened. And eventually, I would die of natural causes. And this would all be behind me. Then my desk phone rang. Arthur. The voice on the other end was cold, mechanical. It was his assistant, Pamela. Mr. Hayes wants to see you in his office. What for? I asked, my voice cracking slightly. He didn't specify, just get in here. The walk to his office felt like a march to the gallows. His office was a massive glass box at the corner of the floor. Everyone could see in, but no one could hear. It was designed to display power. I knocked lightly on the glass door. He didn't look up from his laptop. He just flicked a finger, gesturing for me to enter. I stepped inside and closed the door. The silence in here was similar to the silence in his apartment. Insulated. Heavy. You wanted to see me? I asked, keeping my tone perfectly flat. He finished typing a sentence, hit send with entirely too much force, and then slowly closed the laptop. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He looked at me. Really looked at me. The cold boardroom exterior was there. But up close, I could see the cracks, the faint purple shadows under his eyes, the tense set of his jaw. Sit, he commanded. I sat in one of the rigid guest chairs, keeping my posture defensive. The Peterson merger, he started, his voice completely level. Your projections for Q3 are conservative. Too conservative. I blinked. Work. We were talking about work. The relief washed over me so fast I almost felt dizzy. I base them on the current market volatility, I replied, slipping instantly into my cynical, professional persona. Peterson's logistics chain is a mess. If we assume optimal performance, we're setting ourselves up for a 20% shortfall. Harrison stared at me. He didn't blink. He just watched my face as I spoke. You don't believe they can turn it around. I don't believe in fairy tales, I said, a little too sharply. I believe in data. The data says they're bleeding money. You're very committed to the worst-case scenario, Arthur. In all things, it seems. The air in the room shifted. It grew thick, suffocating. He wasn't talking about the Peterson merger anymore. I'm a realist, I said, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. Harrison unclasped his hands and leaned forward, resting his forearms on the heavy oak desk. The physical distance between us shrank. Are you? He asked quietly. Because a realist would acknowledge the facts of a situation rather than sprinting out of a door and pretending reality didn't happen. Panic flared again. Harrison, I don't, he interrupted, his voice flashing with sudden, sharp anger. He reined it in almost immediately, but I saw it. Don't insult my intelligence, Arthur. You said you didn't remember anything. I let you walk out because I thought you were genuinely terrified. But watching you today, watching you sit in those meetings, perfectly composed, completely detached. He let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "You're a very good liar." "I'm not lying," I said, gripping the armrests of the chair until my fingers went numb. We were drunk. It was a party. People do stupid things when they're drunk. It doesn't mean anything. Harrison's expression hardened. The vulnerability I thought I had seen vanished entirely. He looked at me like I was a spreadsheet with bad numbers. "I see," he said. The words were carved from ice. "It was just a drunken mistake. Meaningless." "Yes," I forced the word out. It tasted like ash. Harrison held my gaze for a long, agonizing moment. Then he sat back, grabbing his laptop and flipping it open. The dismissal was absolute. "Revise the Peterson projections. I want 3 models, conservative, moderate, and aggressive, on my desk by tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow? That will take all night." "Then I suggest you buy some coffee," he said, not looking up from the screen. "You're dismissed, Arthur." I stood up, my legs feeling like lead. I walked out of the glass box, fully aware that the entire floor was watching me. I kept my face blank. I went back to my cubicle, sat down, and stared at the blinking cursor on my screen. I had won. I had successfully defended my cynical, isolated little life. I had pushed him away and maintained the boundaries. So why did I feel like I was bleeding to death? By 9 p.m., the office was a ghost town. The fluorescent lights had switched to their dimmed, after-hours setting, casting long, melancholy shadows across the empty cubicles. I was on my 4th cup of coffee, staring at the moderate projection model for the Peterson merger, but the numbers meant absolutely nothing. My brain was a malfunctioning projector, flashing unsanctioned images against my will. Memory. The corner of the bar. The music thumping against my spine. Harrison stepping into my personal space. The smell of sandalwood. He had taken my ridiculous gin and tonic out of my hand and set it on a nearby table. "You drink like a man trying to poison himself, Arthur," he had said, his mouth close to my ear to be heard over the noise. "I drink like a man trying to survive corporate America," I had replied. He had laughed, a real deep sound that I had never heard in the office. "You think you're the only one drowning?" I rubbed my eyes viciously, trying to scrub the image away. It didn't work. The dam was cracking. The lie I had told him and myself was eroding under the weight of the silence. Memory. The back of the cab. The streetlight strobing across his face. He had looked exhausted. He had rested his head back against the leather seat, closed his eyes, and let out a long breath. Without thinking, I had reached out. My fingers brushed the back of his hand. He didn't pull away. Instead, he turned his hand over and intertwined his fingers with mine. The grip was desperate, grounding. "I'm so tired, Arthur," he had murmured into the dark. "Me too," I had said. It hadn't been a drunken stumble. It hadn't been a blackout mistake. It had been deliberate. A collision of 2 lonely, cynical people seeking a momentary pause in the relentless grind. "Are the models finished?" I violently jumped in my chair, slamming my knee against the underside of the desk. Harrison was standing at the edge of my cubicle. His suit jacket was off, left somewhere in his office. His sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, exposing his forearms. His tie was loosened. He looked disheveled. He looked incredibly dangerous to my carefully constructed apathy. "Almost," I lied, wincing as I rubbed my knee. "Just running the final stress tests on the aggressive model." He stepped fully into my cubicle space. It was too small for him. He leaned against the partition wall, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked down at me. You've been staring at the same cell for 10 minutes, he pointed out mildly. I'm pacing myself. He didn't smile. He just kept looking at me. The silence stretched between us, thick and unresolved. The entire building felt entirely empty, leaving just the two of us suspended in the dim light. Why did you lie? He asked. The question was soft, but it hit with the force of a physical blow. I didn't. Stop it, he commanded gently. He uncrossed his arms and took a step closer. I had nowhere to retreat. My back was pressed against my chair. Just stop fighting for 1 minute, please. I looked up at him. The armor was completely gone. He wasn't the VP of acquisitions. He was just a guy who looked as exhausted and terrified as I felt. Because it's easier, I whispered, the truth slipping out before my cynical brain could stop it. Because if I don't remember it, it didn't happen. And if it didn't happen, I don't have to deal with the consequences. The consequences of what? Ruining your pristine reputation as the office misanthrope? The consequences of wanting something I can't have, I snapped, my voice echoing slightly in the empty room. The anger was sudden, a defensive flare. You're my boss, Harrison. You dictate my schedule, my salary, my entire professional existence. We are fundamentally unequal. What happened? It was a lapse in judgment. For both of us. It was stupid. Stupid, he repeated, testing the word. He moved suddenly, placing one hand on my desk and the other on the back of my chair, leaning down until his face was inches from mine. I held my breath. Is that what you call it? Because I recall a conversation in the back of a cab where you sounded like you actually gave a damn about something other than your spreadsheets. My heart was beating so fast I thought it might shatter my ribs. I was drunk. You were honest, he corrected, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. For the first time since I met you, you dropped the cynical bastard act and let me see you. And I let you see me. And then you woke up, panicked, and shoved me back in a box. I panicked because I woke up naked in a $15 million penthouse with a man who fires people for using the wrong font, I shot back, gripping the arms of my chair. Harrison flinched. He actually flinched. He pulled back slightly, looking away. I am demanding, he said stiffly. Because I have to be. Because this industry eats weakness. But that isn't who I am, not all the time. He looked back at me, his gray eyes searching mine. It wasn't who I was on Saturday night. I swallowed hard. The defensive walls I had built around myself for years were crumbling, turning to dust under his gaze. I remember the cab, I admitted, my voice barely audible over the hum of the HVAC. Harrison froze. I remember the cab, I repeated, looking down at my hands. I remember holding your hand. I remember how quiet it was. I remember standing in your hallway. I looked up, meeting his eyes. I remember kissing you. And I remember you kissing me back, like it was the only thing keeping you upright. The silence in the office changed. It was no longer heavy with tension. It was thick with relief. The truth was out in the open, raw and messy and undeniable. Harrison exhaled a long, shaky breath. He closed his eyes for a second, a look of profound relief washing over his face. When he opened them, the hardness was entirely gone. I asked you if you remembered, he said quietly, leaning back in slightly. Because if you truly didn't, I was going to let it go. I was going to let you pretend it was just a drunken blackout. But if you did remember, he reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from my face, before he let his hand drop to his side. If you remembered, I needed to know if it meant as much to you as it did to me. I stared at him. The cynical voice in my head was screaming at me to run, to tell him he was crazy, to protect my job and my isolated, safe little life. But I looked at his exhausted, hopeful face, and for the first time in years, the cynic lost. "I don't know what this is," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I don't know how to do this. I'm a mess. I'm entirely inappropriate for you. This is an HR nightmare." Harrison let out a small, breathless laugh. "It's a complete disaster," he agreed. "I could lose my job. I'd resign before I let that happen," he said, and the absolute certainty in his voice made my chest ache. He didn't ask for permission this time. He closed the remaining distance, his hand coming up to cup the side of my neck, his thumb brushing against my jawline. His touch was warm, grounding. It felt exactly like it had in the dark of his apartment. "Arthur," he murmured, his thumb stroking my skin. "What?" I breathed. "Save your work. We're going home." I looked at the monitor. The moderate projection model was still incomplete. The numbers were still messy. The reality of Peterson's failing logistics was still there. But for the first time, I didn't care about the worst-case scenario. I hit save, closed the laptop, and stood up. I was exactly the same height as him. We stood toe-to-toe in the dim fluorescent light, the corporate world stripped away, leaving just two tired men who were finally done pretending. He didn't kiss me. Not yet. He just let his hand slide down to grip my shoulder, a solid, reassuring weight. "Tomorrow is going to be complicated," he warned me, his voice low. "I know," I said, stepping out of the cubicle, walking beside him down the dark aisle toward the elevator. "But for a realist, I'm suddenly feeling incredibly optimistic." Harrison smiled in the dark, and for the first time, the silence didn't feel heavy at all. Tuesday morning was entirely different from Sunday. I woke up to the smell of espresso, not stale scotch. The sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows was blinding, but this time, it didn't feel like a spotlight interrogating my failures. I lay there for a minute, staring at the flawless ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of the city below. Then, the shower shut off in the master bathroom. Panic, my old and familiar friend, attempted a brief resurgence. I squashed it. We had made a decision in the dim light of my cubicle. We were doing this, whatever this was. Harrison walked into the bedroom, a towel slung low around his waist, vigorously drying his hair with a smaller one. Drops of water clung to his shoulders. He stopped when he saw I was awake. The harsh morning light caught the gray in his eyes, softening them. "I make terrible coffee," he said, tossing the small towel onto a chair. "But it's hot. I've drank break room sludge for 3 years. My standards are subterranean." He laughed, a quiet rumbling sound, and walked over to the edge of the bed. He didn't hesitate. He leaned down and kissed me. It wasn't frantic or fueled by alcohol and desperation like Saturday night. It was slow, deliberate. It tasted like mint toothpaste and impending doom. "We need a system," I said, pulling back slightly, resting my hand against his chest. His heart was beating a steady rhythm against my palm. "A system. For the office. We can't arrive together. We can't leave together. If Pamela even suspects something, the entire floor will know by lunch." Harrison sighed, the corporate armor slowly sliding back into place, hardening the lines around his mouth. "You leave first. Give it 20 minutes. We keep all communication strictly professional on the company servers. We don't linger in the hallways." It sounded clinical, It sounded like an acquisition strategy. It was exactly what we needed to survive. Right, I agreed, sliding out of bed. The cold floor shocked my bare feet. I'll see you at the 10 a.m. status meeting. Arthur, I paused halfway to my clothes. He was watching me, his expression unreadable. I am going to tear your Peterson projections apart today, he said quietly. The aggressive model is flawed. You missed a variable in their supply chain overhead. The words felt like a bucket of ice water. The reality of our situation crashed down around us. He was still the VP. I was still the junior analyst. He couldn't go easy on me without raising suspicion, and he wouldn't compromise his integrity even if he could. I know, I said, keeping my voice level. I'll be ready to defend them. By 9:45 a.m., my stomach was a tangled knot of acid and anxiety. I sat in the conference room, staring at the polished mahogany table, waiting for the rest of the team to file in. Greg took the seat next to me, dropping his notebook with a heavy thud. Ready for the slaughter? Greg murmured, adjusting his tie. I heard Hayes practically threw his phone at the wall this morning over the legal draft. I didn't answer. At exactly 10 a.m., the glass door swung open. Harrison walked in. The temperature in the room instantly plummeted. He didn't look at me. He walked straight to the head of the table, unbuttoned his suit jacket, and sat down. Let's get started. Peterson merger, projections. His voice was a whip crack. Arthur, walk us through it. I stood up, projecting my screen onto the wall monitor. I went through the conservative and moderate models smoothly. No interruptions. Then I pulled up the aggressive model. This assumes optimal supply chain efficiency post-merger, I started, pointing to the key metrics. Stop, Harrison interrupted. The single word severed the tension in the room like a guillotine. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. His eyes were locked onto the screen, refusing to meet mine. Your supply chain overhead variable is a joke. You're factoring in a standard 3% margin of error for transport delays. Peterson's primary hubs are in the Midwest. Have you looked at the long-term weather modeling? Or the impending strikes with the freight union? The union strikes are currently mediated. Mediated, not resolved, Harrison snapped, his voice echoing in the silent room. You are projecting aggressive growth on the back of a prayer, Arthur. It's sloppy. It's amateurish. Vanguard doesn't buy fairy tales. My face burned. I knew he had to do this. I knew it was coming. But sitting here in front of 12 colleagues, having the man I had kissed 3 hours ago systematically humiliate me was a different kind of agony. The cynical armor I had shed last night tried to knit itself back together. It was a survival instinct. I'll revise the margin of error, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. See that you do, before close of business. He finally looked at me. It was a fraction of a second, a brief flicker of his eyes to mine. I saw the apology there, the sharp, suffocating regret. But it didn't make the burning in my chest stop. The rest of the day was a blur of numbers and silent panic. Every time my phone rang, I jumped. Every time someone walked past my cubicle, I minimized my spreadsheet. Paranoia was a physical weight, pressing down on my lungs. I finished the revisions by 4:30 p.m. and emailed them to Pamela. I didn't wait around. I packed my bag, kept my head down, and walked to the elevator. I was standing on the crowded subway, gripping the overhead bar, when my phone vibrated in my pocket. A text message from unknown number, my apartment, 8 p.m., please. I stared at the screen as the train rattled through the tunnel. The cynic in me screamed that this was a mistake. We were playing with fire in a room full of gasoline. It was only a matter of time before everything burned down. The silence in his apartment Tuesday night was suffocating. I sat on the edge of the incredibly expensive minimalist sofa. Harrison was pacing. He had shed the suit jacket and tie, but the corporate tension was still wired into his shoulders. "I had to do it," he said, raking a hand through his hair. "If I accepted a flawed model from you after rejecting perfect ones from Greg last month, it would establish a pattern of favoritism. They would dig. They would find out." "I know, Harrison," I said, quietly, staring at the grain of the coffee table. "I'm not an idiot. I understand the optics." "Then why do you look like you're packing your bags?" he asked, stopping his pacing to turn and face me. The exhaustion in his voice was raw. I looked up. "Because understanding the optics doesn't make it sustainable. I can't be your punching bag in the conference room and your secret in the bedroom. My brain doesn't compartmentalize like that. It hurts." The word hung in the air between us. Vulnerability was a foreign currency to both of us, and spending it felt terrifying. Harrison slowly walked over and sat on the coffee table, directly in front of me. Our knees brushed. He leaned his elbows on his thighs, bringing his face level with mine. "I spent my entire career building walls," he said, his voice a low gravel. "I cut out anything that could be leveraged against me. Friends, family, relationships. Vanguard became the only thing that mattered because a spreadsheet doesn't wake up one day and decide to leave you." He reached out tentatively and took my hand. His fingers traced the knuckles, tracing the tension held there. "Then I found you hiding in a corner with a gin and tonic," he continued, looking down at our hands. "And you were just as walled off as I was, just as cynical. But I saw the cracks, Arthur. I saw them, because I have the exact same ones." He looked up, and the intensity in his gray eyes pinned me to the sofa. "I am not going to lose this," he stated. It wasn't a corporate mandate. It was a promise. I refused to let the machine grind this down into something ugly. "How?" I challenged, my throat tight. "We break every HR policy in the book just by being in the same room. What are you going to do? Stop managing me?" "Yes," I froze. "What?" Harrison stood up, pulling me up with him. "I spent the afternoon on the phone with the CFO and the head of human resources. I requested a structural reorganization of the acquisitions pipeline." My blood ran cold. "You fired me?" "God, no." He let out a breathless, stressed laugh, gripping my shoulders. "I transferred you, laterally. You're moving to the risk assessment division, effective Monday." My brain struggled to process the information. Risk assessment was a parallel division. They operated on a completely different floor. They reported to a completely different vice president. "You moved me," I whispered. "You're out of my direct chain of command," Harrison confirmed, his eyes searching my face for a reaction. "You don't report to me. I don't review your models. I don't set your schedule. We are, legally and corporately speaking, entirely independent entities." "Why would HR agree to that?" "Because I told them I was dating you," he said simply. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the loudest silence of my entire life. "You told HR," I repeated, the words feeling clumsy on my tongue. "You, Harrison Hayes, the man who fires people for breathing too loudly, voluntarily went to human resources and disclosed a relationship with a junior analyst." "I filed a standard conflict of interest disclosure," he said, a faint, genuine smile finally breaking through the tension on his face. "It was incredibly bureaucratic. There were forms. I had to sign things in triplicate. You could have jeopardized your position." "My position doesn't keep me warm at night, Arthur. It doesn't hold my hand in the back of a cab." He stepped closer, sliding his arms around my waist, pulling me against his chest. I am a realist, remember? I looked at the data. The data said hiding was going to destroy us. So, I eliminated the variable. I rested my forehead against his shoulder. The heavy, crushing weight of paranoia that I had been carrying all day evaporated. It was just gone, replaced by a strange, buoyant feeling that I vaguely recognized as hope. Risk assessment is boring, I mumbled into his shirt. They just look at debt-to-income ratios all day. You're a cynic. You'll love it, he murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. And if you get bored, you can just complain to me about your boss. I hear that's a very normal relationship dynamic. I laughed, wrapping my arms around his neck. The apartment didn't feel like an interrogation room anymore. It didn't feel like a museum. It felt warm. It felt real. We didn't have a fairy tale ending. We still worked in a fluorescent hellscape. We still had grueling hours, unreasonable demands, and terrible coffee. Monday would bring awkward stares from Greg and silent judgment from Pamela. But as Harrison held me, the silence of the city wrapping around us like a protective blanket, I realized the cynic in me had finally lost the war. I wasn't surviving the corporate machine in isolation anymore. I looked up at him, the harsh lines of his face entirely relaxed, his gray eyes soft and unguarded. "Do you remember everything, Harrison?" I asked quietly, echoing the question that had started this entire, terrifying avalanche. He smiled, leaning down to press his mouth against mine. "Every single detail," he promised. "Navigating the corporate grind is exhausting, but finding a real, deeply flawed and genuine connection in the middle of that fluorescent hellscape makes the hustle worth it." Arthur and Harrison proved that sometimes the most romantic gesture isn't a grand speech. It's signing HR conflict of interest forms in triplicate so you don't have to hide anymore. If you love this grounded, messy journey of two cynics finding their humanity, smash that like button. Share this video with someone who hates office politics but loves a good romance, and subscribe to the channel for more deeply human stories. See you in the next one.